It's Mazzy here. I'm pumped up because I'm going to Los Angeles. Welcome back. I haven't been to Los Angeles in 5 years since the pandemic and my work situation has changed. But I want to go back first to August 4th, 1962. It's the first time I arrived with my parents into Los Angeles, California. And we went to Disneyland, Marine World, and Hollywood, Grauman's Chinese Theater, went to Dino's from the 77 Sunset Strip movie facade on Sunset Boulevard, all over Hollywood, did all the stuff. How do you remember that, Maslow, the exact date you first arrived in Los Angeles? Well, I'll tell you. Because the radio was on and we heard a news report that Marilyn Monroe was found dead. And I looked it up and that was August 4th. So this is a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks before my 8th birthday. But I remember that so vividly. But we drove down from the Bay Area. My mother wasn't a flyer, so we would drive every summer pretty much down to LA to Disneyland and make that trip. And sometimes I was able to bring a friend, and it was great. And I have vivid memories. And I've probably been to LA hundreds and hundreds of times. I know it well. Obviously things change, but I know the basic layout of it because for work for over 3 decades, I would go down there regularly, working photo shoots, showing portfolios around. But since I'm going this week, I'll be there for 4 days. We're meeting at Amoeba on Friday, but depending when you watch this video, maybe over by now. We'll see. But I decided to pick a handful of records that I love about LA. Now, I didn't take a deep dive, and I'm missing a lot of artists, and I didn't necessarily pick their best album, but these are records from LA artists that mean a lot to me. The Mamas and Papas, and unfortunately, I've never gotten a copy with The Toilet Uncensored. I realize, understand that is coming out, being reissued, where they showcase the toilet. They used to put stickers on it initially, and then the sort of built-on hype sticker. So if you ever find a copy, it's worth some bucks. This is an important album. Lou Adler, I believe, produced this, but obviously Monday and California Dreamin'. And California Dreamin' to me is the epitome of California sunshine song. What a great song. It's definitely about Los Angeles and about that whole scene there. Great record. I love this record, Mamas and Papas. Great singles band. But that album is a good album. To me, this is an important band out of the LA scene. And of course, it's Buffalo Springfield. The song specifically about Los Angeles here, it's For What It's Worth, that protest song about the riots on Sunset Strip that Stephen Stills wrote. And this came out, in 1966? As I recall, the first pressing or the mono pressing doesn't have that song. It was added later. But what a great album this is. Again, a band that burned bright with the tempestuous Neil Young really was kind of getting that going. 2.5 albums they put out and then a double album. But important songs, great singers. I mean, Neil Young is probably the worst singer in the band, and I love Neil Young's voice. You got Stephen Stills, you got Richie Furay, you got Dewey Martin, I believe, in here as well. Bruce Palmer. Yeah, Dewey Martin on drums. But I love this record. There was a Rhino box a few years ago that had the mono and stereo versions of both. And they're both good and they're very different mixes. So that's something to check out. Another band is Love. And the irony with Love is, for whatever reason, I missed their masterpiece, Alone Again, or that album, Forever Changes, for decades. I don't think I heard it literally until the late 80s, early 90s. I don't know why it passed me by. No one ever played it in the store. But I got into Love because of this album, especially the single that was put on this album in their version of Burt Bacharach, Hal David's My Little Red Book. Apparently a version that Burt Bacharach hated. But it's a garage band, funky, wonderful, soulful, just dirty version of that song. I love the version here, produced by Jacques Holzman, a band that never fulfilled its potential sales-wise on Elektra Records. You know, the time of the Doors, and of course the Doors, flew out the door literally, and Love kind of, they had a few great hit singles, but album-wise, it wasn't they weren't as popular there. Then to me, I couldn't talk about the LA scene of music without talking about the Byrds. And I just picked from 68, the Notorious Byrd Brothers, with this great photograph taken in Laurel Canyon, I believe. And this is when, into the recording of this, they kick out David Crosby. But this is that cosmic cowboy version, one of the versions of the Byrds. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful album produced by Gary Usher. He did several of their albums. The early albums produced by Terry Melcher are friggin' amazing. Probably my California #1 band of all times. All times. All times. Still, 11 albums. Can't go wrong with any of them, really. An iconic album is LA Woman here. This is the Analog Productions Double 45, which sounds killer. This isn't even my favorite Doors album. If you watch my recent Doors video, the first 2 albums, to me, are the epitome of what Jim Morrison and the Doors were about. This is a great album. Of course, LA Woman is an amazing song, amazing sounding recording. But after this, obviously we know the history there. But this is a wonderful album. Everyone, a lot of people say this is their favorite, but I think the essence of the Doors, it gets into a different thing. And to me, the Doors, LA Doors, the intensity of the Doors, Jim Morrison's lyric, and the creativity of them when they really had a great cohesiveness are those first 2 albums, the debut and Strange Days. Of course, another album from the Laurel Canyon scene, an important album from the Canadians' point of view that moved to LA. Obviously, Neil Young was one of them, but it's Joni Mitchell's Blue. Not my favorite Joni Mitchell album, but an important album, and I love this record. There's a certain mood to it. I mean, the song California, her voice, her vocal style on this, but it's really just a beautiful record, and it really showcases her great lyrics and songwriting and acoustic guitar playing and guitar playing arrangements. Just a perfect record. Again, not my favorite, but I think everyone needs it in their collection, but it is a really good record. Now, the Beach Boys, again, you can't talk about LA, even though Hawthorne, Southern California, the greater area, the Beach Boys. But being from Northern California, I wasn't into surf music, and I didn't get into the Beach Boys literally until they kind of went major production, psychedelic in a way, with Good Vibrations. To me, one of the best in the top 5 singles of the 1960s. But for the sake of this video, the one that just spoke to me, I went through my record collection and pulled records from these artists that are about LA, and I picked up Surf's Up. I think this is a really interesting album, beautiful album. Disney Girls is such a stunningly beautiful song that didn't seem to get a lot of love initially, but it's so beautiful and so well written. And Surf's Up, of course. The song Surf's Up alone is just beautiful. I love the whole iconic cover here, the artwork of Native American, First Nations visuals, the Beach Boys. From 1972, Ry Cooder's Into the Purple Valley. 2 artists I always refer to as having this kind of bluesy, swampy sound that you wouldn't believe in a million years. They were really born and bred in the Los Angeles area. Ry Cooder, born and bred in Santa Monica, does this album. This is from 1972, and I just love this record. A blend of traditional folk, country, Johnny Cash songs, Woody Guthrie songs. Just a beautiful record. Vigilante Man, Hey Porter, of course, from Johnny Cash. Billy the Kid, Teardrops Will Fall. He's influenced by the R&B stuff and the bluesy, soulful side. And of course, later he would be one of the great interpreters and curators of world music and various music from like the Buena Vista Social Club and others. And then just a few years later, that great diptych of albums he would put out, to me, are essential in any collection. Paradise and Lunch and Chicken Skin Music, just mixing Tejana music, and a wonderful interpreter, and introduced me to a lot of great music. I just love what Ry Cooder has done for music and on his own, too. I love this record cover and this very kind of Hollywood style. Fantastic record. Very, to me, that's Hollywood. That literally is Hollywood, a vintage piece in image, if not anything else, if not musically. Next is a band that I always talk about, and that's Little Feat. This is the debut album. Not my favorite album, but I wanted to put this album, and it has Susan Titleman took the cover photograph, who is Ry Cooder's wife, and who is in the car with Ry Cooder there in this album here. And this is the only album that's a photograph. Neon Parks would do all those great illustrations for Little Feat. The great bottleneck playing of Lowell George, and one of my all-time favorite kind of country songs, road songs in Willem. They recorded it twice. So many people from Linda Ronstadt to C Train to many other country crossover artists would cover that song. And on this version, Lowell George injured his hand for a period, and so Ry Cooder comes in and does the bottleneck on that track on here, and I just love this record. Again, it's not my favorite of theirs, but they haven't done a bad record. Every record is great. Important LA band that just always didn't quite make it. Put definitely one of the top 3 live albums of the 1970s out, Waiting for Columbus, an amazing live record. Recorded at Pauley Pavilion in 1971, just another band from LA, released in 1972, this Mother's album. One of the 2 live albums that they did with Flo and Eddie, Florence and Leach and Eddie, very conceptual in a way. The opening, in fact, the entire side 1, Billy the Mountain, is sort of the parody of the whole rock opera craze here. They do a great live version of Call Any Vegetable, and they go into a medley of things. If you're into Frank Zappa and the Mothers, and you like their live album, what's great about Frank Zappa, most of the time he would record these live things, these great shows, and then augment things in the studio. I'm not sure if that happened here, but again, it's called just another band from LA. Frank Zappa is an integral part of the LA music scene. Lived in Laurel Canyon as well for many years up until his death, but fantastic album. I would say the 71 Fillmore album is more entertaining for a live album, but this still is a good album, and it represents the LA thing, especially recorded at UCLA there too. Now, Greetings from LA. Obviously the cover alone. Going back to my time in the 60s and the 70s, go to LA. Every time I'd go to Los Angeles, literally I'd get out of the car and my eyes would burn. This is what LA looked like. This is an unretouched photograph of the smog in LA. And despite what people think about greenhouse gases and California charging more for gas because of the additives to help alleviate pollution, it's not like that anymore down there. I mean, the sun and the heat and the warmth is one thing, but you don't have days like this to this extent. Yeah, sure, once in a while you get a burning eye thing happening, but this is what it looked like. And this is from, again, I think this is 1972 as well, 71 or 72. This is a very unusual album for Tim Buckley, and it's my favorite album. He's kind of that free folk, psychedelic, avant folk artist who appeared in one episode of The Monkees, never quite made it on his own. Obviously, his son is Jeff Buckley. Both died way too young. But side 1 of this album, for me, is a perfect album. This kind of represents LA at the time. And of course, this is an original copy, and my postcard is intact. It's perforated so you can take it out. You see a lot of used copies of this without the postcard. But side 1 is perfect. It's soulful. It's funky. It has this bass and drum and rhythm and bass thing that just is intense. And it's a sexy, swirling, funky, soulful record. He sounds like a banshee. He sounds like he's having orgasms while he's recording this in some ways. It's not like the more ethereal, folky style of Tim Buckley, but I just love this. And I try to turn people onto it. They get it or they don't. But side 1 is definitely the one, and it just flows together perfectly. Greetings from LA by Tim Buckley. You know, the whole LA scene, there's so many other artists, but obviously Jackson Browne is part of that group with the Eagles, which I'm not showing today, with John David Souther, which I'm not showing today, with Linda Ronstadt, I'm not showing today, Bonnie Raitt, and so many others. I'm not really showing a lot in that scene, but I like Jackson Browne records, and there's a certain personal tragedy and sorrow and melancholy in some of his records. great LA musicians he was working with at the time, Waddy Wachtel and others. But to me, this is the masterpiece. But all his records, up until Lawyers in Love, I guess that's the one, right? Are great and essential in my house. And Late for the Sky is beautiful, from that opening up song, Late in the Sky, to Fountain of Sorrow, farther on, The Late Show, For a Dancer, and Before the Deluge. Just, they're epics in that Southern California way. And what I like about it, the guy has an amazing voice, but he's not that beautiful, pure voice like the Eagles had. Thank goodness. I mean, Eagles get a lot of knocking and a lot of love too, and people love to hate them because I think Don Henley is a punchable person in some ways. But they made great records. You can't argue that. But I think there's a little more soul, if you can call it blue-eyed white soul, in this artist, in Jackson Browne, over the Eagles. And of course, he probably made a lot of money off the Eagles alone, for the co-writing and penmanship, working with them, all those roommates and the whole LA scene when it finally broke. The other person that I was alluding to, who sounds like he's not from Los Angeles, but is definitely part of an LA dynasty, extended family in music, from Arnold Newman composers to David Newman cousins, all these great composers, orchestra leaders, and writers in Los Angeles, is Randy Newman. And my favorite Randy Newman, hands down, is Sail Away, and Good Old Boys next, probably. But I had to show this. The obvious thing is, because it includes the hit, I Love L.A., and it became this weird anthem. And his writing is so humorous, and he'll get political, and he has his pulse on things. And that's what I love about him. And he's got this voice that sounds like he's from the South. And of course, I understand when he was young, he had family in New Orleans, so they would spend some summers down there where he got a lot of that Southern New Orleans influence. But a great songwriter, great composer, composed a lot of scores for Barry Levinson movies and others. Of course, Toy Story and You Got a Friend in Me. But what a great songwriter. He's never made a bad album. Obviously, some more better than others. Probably one of his biggest hits, between this and Short People. So he does have that sense of humor. And, lyrically, he's incredible. And sometimes people take offense because they don't understand where he's coming from in some of his lyrics. But Randy Newman's got to be there. And to me, one of the best albums about L.A. and one of my top 25 albums of all time is the Asylum debut of Warren Zevon's self-titled record. There's a feel of the West. There's a Copland-esque orchestration to him. Ry Cooder, Warren Zevon also was a great piano player, and he could arrange his own strings and orchestration. And this is so great. Obviously, songs like Carmelita. And throughout this record, aside from the songs about the West, Frank and Jesse James, it is like L.A. in a way. And he talks about specific streets and signs and the Pioneer Chicken Stand and things like that throughout it. And it's a dark album. It's a beautiful record, and he has all the LA heroes, I guess, or big shots of the day in 1976 when this came out. Everyone from part of Fleetwood Mac, part of the Beach Boys, John David Souther, Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers. He was their piano player on tour before he went solo for a little while. David Lindley, of course, again, and just Jackson Browne, who produced this record. So it was an incestuous time with these LA studio musicians of this ilk. And this is kind of, in the 70s, the whole Wrecking Crew thing that was huge in the 60s up until early 70s. And they were still around. They got pushed aside for all the bands playing their own shit. And a different set of studio musicians in a way, different generation of it. This, to me, is a perfect album. I just love it. I adore it. Warren Zevon's debut on Asylum Records. Then X's debut is called Los Angeles, or as they say in the song, Los Angeles. To me, this may be my favorite punk band because they're sort of melodic. They got a little bit of a country-ish rockabilly influence, partly because of Billy Zoom's guitar playing. And I saw them maybe 15 times in their heyday, and once or twice since, in recent years. Uh, they're not the hardcore punk band like others. Obviously, we have the Dead Kennedys in San Francisco, and I've seen Black Flag and all these other bands are more hardcore. They're not that. But to me, they're amongst the best songwriters of the punk scene. I just love X and this record. Important record. The other LA connection, this was produced by Ray Manzarek of The Doors, and they do a cover of Soul Kitchen, The Doors song, and they do a great version. Everything is amped up. But the vocals between John Doe and Exene Cervenka are just really dynamic, not in a great harmonic way, but there's something atonal and just really attracting to me of X. I just love the band. Tight as hell live, tight as hell on their first few albums. And then they open up a little bit more in the, what we now call Americana style. So they really merge and they matured. And I think it's great, being into punk, being into metal, being into whatever, mature as a band and not be afraid to shift a little bit in any of the genres you're in, which is great. Again, going back, I'd say in the new wave scene, and they started as a punk band and a great representation of LA. And it's amazing how huge, massive they got out of the box on their first official album on IRS, and that's the Go-Go's. And it's power pop. It's great hooks. Our Lips Are Sealed on here. This Town. What a great record. I just love it. There's a certain little campiness to the cover and the cover art. There are very color variations on the cover that you can get. I think they came out initially that way, but the Go-Go's, a great band from LA. Now, maybe the greatest LA band still standing from East LA, and that's Los Lobos. I've seen them many times, and they're a wonderful band. They bring on this great Mexican sound, border music, Tejana, but they do their own breed of it. Obviously, they've had acoustic albums, they've had albums produced by the likes of T-Bone Burnett and others, but I tell you, this is one of my favorites. They did another one, or their early album before they went to Slash Records. They were kind of thrown into the punk new wavy thing, like with X and those bands, and on bills at that time, just because of timing. And they really didn't have anything musically linked to those, but it was a time when there's a lot of openness. Obviously, the Blasters with their rockabilly sound too. Again, same type of thing around that time. But this is one of my favorite albums. This is Los Pistola y el Corazon. This is one of their, is it 2 or 3 albums, all sung in Spanish, and it's a gorgeous album. From East LA, one of the greatest bands. If you ever get a chance to see them live, what's great, they're in a way like a jam band, but better musicians and better singers than even the Grateful Dead. You've heard it here. And they're still together. I think maybe they had one member change early on. I was trying to think of what's my favorite band that's been around for over 30 years, almost 40 years, with all the original members. And they're the closest I could think of, Los Lobos. This was from 1988, Slash, picked up by Warner Brothers Records. Just gorgeous record with acoustic instruments and just the feel of their music, the soulfulness of their Latin music, their music from Mexico is just nothing short of astounding. Of course, they got really famous because of the soundtrack they did for La Bamba, and that was like their top selling record, but it brought it to a new audience. Obviously, Richard Valens, the whole thing of his singing, and it was the perfect artist to replicate that for that movie. But what a great LA band, and East LA band, Los Lobos. Go see him when you can. Another artist from LA who I think is one of the greatest artists of the last quarter century is Beck. And again, there are a lot of records I could have picked on Beck, but Mellow Gold was that one that bridged the gap from independence to a major label picking him up with Geffen here. This is an original copy, and of course the song Loser, and then the rest is history. But he was able to put some records out on his own in between his initial signing with Geffen. And what a creative, comes from East LA, very influenced by Latin music as well as soul music and hip hop and rap and stuff. And he's the real deal. Now, some people think all of a sudden he's too dancey and stuff, but he's the real deal. He mixes it up. Mutations is the best record that Bowie and Ray Davis in that ilk never made. It's so British and so wonderful. Of course, Odelay is a funkiness with the Dust Brothers producing that. I just love that record, and that was a massive hit as well. And of course, Sea Change and Mellow, no, what's the other one? The other mellow one like Sea Change that he won, Morning Phase, that he won the Grammy for Best Album. I mean, I just love his direction. I kick myself for missing his recent shows where he worked with orchestras, huge symphony orchestras, and I think that's great too. So he's an adventurous artist. I mean, he's doing the dance thing now, and it's really good. I've seen him live every time he's come here. I've probably seen him 6-7 times now, all throughout the years. But Beck, to me, an important artist from LA. E in the Eels. What is it? Mark Oliver Everett. I always get that wrong. Great LA composer. He put out 2 solo albums under his name, his initial E. And then he really is the center of the Eels. He kind of started out as a band, but it's really him and other musicians various times. And, you know, the first album, Beautiful Freak, I remember seeing that video on MTV, Beautiful Freak, Novocaine for the Soul. And it was just so surreal, so beautiful. I love his kind of raspy voice. He writes hooks, and very simple hooks, but very catchy. He's probably made more money on soundtracks like Shrek and some of his great songs. But to me, this Daisies of the Galaxy Eels, I mean, just from the cover alone. There he is, a little illustration here. Look at this. But the songs on here, obviously, this is a band that one of the first bands I took my son Joseph to see at the Fillmore, to see the Eels. I've seen them about 5 times now, twice in Seattle here. I like Birds, very catchy. When you have a kid in the car playing the CD, they'll latch onto that. Dailies of the Galaxy, the song It's a Motherfucker. His songs are somewhat depressing at times and somewhat self-deprecating. He had a sister who died by her own hand, apparently, and there's a certain depression in the family, and he writes about it through a lot of his songs. But throughout his writing, there's a certain humor to it. Not in the sense of like Randy Newman, that's really writing about bigger things in the world. He's writing about personal things. Estate sale, tiger in my tank, something is sacred. But his hooks, again, it almost seems like he's writing everything with 3 chords. Very simple. I'm sure it's not just that. I know it's not just that. But they're really great records. And sometimes you'll play a record like this. Soul Jacker is another one of my favorites. And then there'll be songs on a later album that sounds like you've heard it before. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just love, he's one of those artists, I pick everything up. You know, obviously some I catch and latch onto more than others. But out of LAE, I think he really represents that kind of the newish LA, even though now he's probably 50 years old or something. So he's not quite new. This is getting me in the mood for my LA trip there. So thanks for watching. I hope you like it. Just put some other LA ideas. Maybe I'll put together some playlists for myself while I travel. Mazzy loves you. Take care, everyone.